The Supreme Court says most of Trump's tariffs are illegal. So is this the real Liberation Day? Welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your Libertarian review of news and culture from the editors at Reason Magazine and friends. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Nick Gillespie, and special guest, Reason's very own trade and tariffs correspondent, Eric Boehm. I don't think that's your actual title, but there are weeks when it should be.
Close enough.
Eric, let's start with you. The Supreme Court issued this ruling. It was a long time coming, but it was also rushed, right? Like people, they expedited this ruling last week, and it basically said most of Trump's tariffs are illegal. So does that mean the tariffs are over? It's done? Tell us what this means.
Yeah, that's right. So this ruling dealt with the tariffs that Trump had imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. That's most of the tariffs that Trump implemented last year, not quite all of them, but the vast majority of them that were implemented under two different national emergencies having to do with fentanyl coming into the country and also this kind of cockamamie idea that trade deficits are somehow a national emergency. The Supreme Court didn't actually deal with the question of whether any of this stuff counts as an emergency or not because they didn't need to. They overruled the tariffs on sort of two grounds, on statutory grounds and also on constitutional grounds. We can get more into that if you want, but basically the court said that the plain reading of the statute of the IEEPA law says that the president doesn't have the authority to impose tariffs. The law doesn't even contain the word tariffs, as was kind of frequently commented upon when this was in front of the court. And then also there's this bigger question, the major questions doctrine that the court has been used most recently in striking down President Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. And that major questions doctrine basically says that any issue of major economic significance has to come from Congress or has to be clearly delegated by Congress to the executive. And in this case, again, the IEEPA law is clearly not delegating that responsibility of tariffs, not giving that power to the president. And so on both grounds, just like in the lower courts that looked at this, they all came to the same conclusion the Supreme Court did, that on kind of both the statutory question and the constitutional question, the tariffs are invalid. However, just about a few hours after the Supreme Court ruled and after a pretty bizarre press conference, Trump went about implementing a new set of tariffs using a different legal justification. We could talk more about that as well. But these new tariffs, he originally announced a 10% global tariff, then raised that to 15% over the weekend immediately. It's not actually a global tariff because there's a ton of little carve-outs and special exemptions in the text of the specifics that the White House released. But those tariffs are being implemented under a different law, the Trade Act of 1974. And they are also, as I detailed in a piece this morning at Reason, they are also probably illegal because, once again, Trump is reading powers into a law that are plainly not there.
So the short version is the court ended one set of illegal tariffs and Trump immediately replaced them with another set of illegal tariffs.
Well, the second set aren't officially illegal, right? Because they haven't been ruled as such by a court. So
stuff can be illegal before the court says it's illegal, my man.
I can look at this. Andrew McCarthy at National Review has written a really good piece as well, looking at this and saying Brian Riley at the National Taxpayers Union has said the same thing, can look at this and say this is clearly outside the bounds of what this law, the Trade Act of 1974, is intended to do. But look, this is where the Trump administration has lived for so much of the past year, right? Is in the kind of ambiguity of doing things that seem like they are illegal, but who is actually going to stop them? This will require courts or Congress, to do something to actually, prevent the president from implementing these new tariffs.
That was the bitterest I've heard in a while. That was like kind of dark, actually.
It was like the Muppets movie villain. Right, there's that Muppets movie where the villain, where the villain in the script, it just said you're supposed to do maniacal laugh, and so the villain just goes maniacal laugh, maniacal laugh. Was what just happened. Which is exactly how I felt watching that Trump press conference. Nick, what did you make of this, and also what did you make of Trump's response to this, which a lot of people have characterized as being kind of unhinged?
Oh, I think it was especially high-minded, almost as high-minded as when he created an AI video literally dropping shit on No Kings protesters when he said that Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch were disgraces or embarrassments to their family. Despite Yeah, I don't know what that makes him, given that he is the one who put them on the Supreme Court. I mean, two things. One, on the Supreme Court ruling, it's good. It's really good, and it's great that it was 6-3. It's a little disturbing that it wasn't 9-0, since it's pretty clear, the way Eric summarized it, like there shouldn't be any question about this. And in a way, it means there were 3 votes, I think, Coney Barrett, John Roberts, and Gorsuch, who were doing something out of principle. You could easily see the 3 liberal justices who voted or made a concurring opinion with them, who voted in with them against Trump, going the other way if it was Biden. And then you have 3 conservative, or so-called conservative judges, who were, more than willing to be like, whatever, whatever the president wants, the president gets. So I find that deeply disturbing, because the Supreme Court has emerged as the only stop against Trump's, abilities. I would like to say it's great that, the system is holding for a variety of reasons. But it's deeply worrying when you look at that. And then with the new ones, it's going to take like a year and a half for this to reach the same level and probably get thrown out. So that's deeply disturbing, as is the fact that Trump apparently realized when he said, okay, it's 10% across the board, that actually reduced some of the tariffs. So he's like, oh, okay, I'm going to bring it up to 15%, which is the limit under the law for 150 days. It's not good. It's not good. And it raises the question of, is Trump the ultimate, test of the system? And when he's done, the system will hold and things will go back to something approaching normal. Or is this the new normal, where we're going to have a chief executive at every level, including a Department of Justice, that just, ignores court orders pretty much until they get higher up? Is this the future?
Nick mentioned the 150 days. That's important under the Trade Act of 1974 that Trump's using here. Again, these are probably illegal tariffs anyway, but if they're legal, if Trump goes through with this, the law clearly says that those tariffs can only be in place for 150 days unless Congress votes to extend them. So one interesting thing that happens here, leaving aside the legal question, is that does actually flip the dynamic with Congress, right? With the IEEPA tariffs, it was they're in place unless Congress votes to get rid of them. This is kind of the other way around. So it does mean that Congress, within 150 days, will have to do something about this. We'll have to have a vote on this.
They will have to break a water pipe in the Capitol and be like, oh, well, we can't come in.
Days
we can't
don't
vote.
Count as days anymore, is the trick they pulled last time.
We can't, we can't vote if we're out of the office, right? Out of the building.
I want to come back to Congress's role in this, but first I want to bring Katherine in here, because Nick mentioned something that I thought was really interesting, which is stability and Trump being a test of the system here. Because SCOTUS did rule against Trump. And one reason why the Supreme Court ruled against Trump is because of the votes of people that Trump himself appointed, like Neil Gorsuch, who wrote a pretty scathing opinion here, or concurrence. Is this, in some ways, the ultimate vindication of the but Gorsuch theory of Trump that was so popular with people who were like, yeah, I don't love him, but Gorsuch in the first term?
I just think we will not have a final ruling on the but Gorsuch vindication until Gorsuch leaves the court. Supreme Court,
and then who's going to rule on it?
Right. Supreme Court careers are so long and are so delightfully, I think, unpredictable that we simply cannot know at this time. However, Gorsuch was pretty good on this one, and I want to read a little bit from what he wrote. For those who think it important for the nation to impose more tariffs, I understand that today's decision will be disappointing. But if history is any guide, the tables will turn and the day will come when those disappointed by today's result will appreciate the legislative process for the bulwark of liberty that it is. Amen, brother. But Gorsuch, that's the point. That's the thing. That's the whole idea. And he did say, if you put me on the court, this is how I'm going to be. That was the whole selling proposition of this man to the Federalist Society and in turn to Trump. And, he did what he said he was going to do. So I will give, we put one tally in the long, long column of but Gorsuch or not but Gorsuch math that we will be doing for hopefully a while to come.
I hope we can access this. There's a spreadsheet somewhere where we can look at this.
Oh, no, I'm doing it like on the lintel post. Like I'm doing it on a, like the way you do your kids' growth charts on a door frame. Like I'm keeping that somewhere permanent.
I'm getting it as a back tattue.
I do kind of want to get that part of the concurrence tattooed on
between
my
the shoulder blades. Work down.
It's great,
the most
right?
painful spot.
It's great, right? It sort of says what it needs to say, and I think if you read between the lines, you barely need to read between the lines here. To go back to what you were saying, Eric, part of what the Supreme Court is saying with this ruling is Congress, do your job. Please do your job, because there are 3 branches in the United States government, and right now only 2 of them are functional. And this is what the situation we have with Trump is that Trump is basically acting like some sort of quasi-king monarch whose only check is sometimes the markets, I guess, but whose only check in government is the courts. And the courts seem to be saying that's not how it should be. Congress has to authorize things specifically in the text. And then also, if you're going to do this 122 nonsense, whether or not it's legal or illegal, then Congress has to reauthorize this. This is a plea from the courts to please step in and do your job, Congress.
Yeah, it's a plea for Congress to do its job. It's also a plea for the Trump administration to do things the right way, which would require going to Congress. I think that gets lost in some of this. I mean, yes, obviously Congress should be doing more to thwart, certainly should have done more to thwart the IEEPA tariffs long before they ever got to the Supreme Court. I think that's clear. But the Trump administration and fans of tariffs like to talk about the 1890s, right, and the 1880s, and when we had more tariffs and when America was supposedly its richest ever, which is all nonsense. But we did have a lot of tariffs back then. And we had those tariffs because presidents in that era went to Congress, or sometimes Congress passed the bills on their own and then forced the president to sign them. But whatever. In any case, those acts came out of Congress. That's the right way to go about doing this. And look, I'm no fan of tariffs. If there was a tariff bill in Congress, I would write about all the reasons why it would be a mistake for Congress to pass it. But if Congress passed it and Trump signed it, we would at least be done with this part of the debate, right? We could debate the policy. We could talk about the consequences. We could talk about why that law should be repealed by a future Congress. But we would at least be done with this debate of whether the executive is just setting tax policy by itself and taking over responsibilities that are obviously part of Congress. Trump could do that tomorrow. He could take a tariff bill to the House, to Mike Johnson, and Mike Johnson would say, sure, buddy, I'll put it up for a vote, because he does whatever Trump wants. And then we would see if it passes or not. And then we would know. And then that's the way you set tax policy. That would give businesses and consumers some sort of understanding of what the playing field is going to look like, which is a big deal for businesses that are trying to navigate this ever-changing tariff regime. It would also allow for the very thing that Trump often claims he wants, which is to have leverage in negotiations with other countries. What sort of leverage do you have with 150 days of tariffs? Every other country in the world is going to say, okay, cool, we'll talk to you in August. That's it, right? So you want something.
Well, they're already making deals with China and elsewhere to begin with. But, I think the leverage, and again, this goes to the question of, is Trump, and we've talked about this in his first term, there is a legitimate conversation going on now. Is Trump, categorically different, this time from the first time or from other presidents? But Eric, I think one of the ways he's saying, we'll be talking about, Iran and deposing foreign leaders of countries. Like Trump, I think, cares less that he has a congressional mandate, and he's going to be willing to scare countries more by saying, I got a really big military type of thing,
Well, also his Truth Social post immediately after it's like a Gene Healy fever dream. It's basically him articulating.
Gene Healy, who wrote the case for more deposing presidents, right? For impeachment.
We should do more,
impeach every president,
impeach every president, but also who has been, for sure the most prescient and most consistent critique of specifically the concentration of power in the executive as being detrimental to liberty, and this reply where he says, the joke is on you, lowercase Supreme Court, because I have so many powers with so many different origins. I have so many potential loopholes to jump through. You can never close them all, and you will chase me to the ends of the earth, and you're not going to catch me. And that's exactly it. That's exactly true. And like we made this situation, and Nick, you said earlier, like the court is the only check on the president. I think actually there are a lot of checks. I mean, the markets have clearly checked him from time to time. Congress, of course, we talked about, but also even sometimes polling, right? Like the very, very abysmal polling on the ICE actions in major cities does seem to have caused a drawdown there. Like I actually think there are tons of potential checks, and the issue is just that is all fighting against this legal situation we've created where the president has so many avenues to just do whatever he wants. And it's very hard work to close those down.
I mean, in fact, there's some new polling. It's not after the ruling, but there's some polling from last week that shows that 64% of Americans disapprove of Trump's tariffs. That said, 75% of Republicans are the only group that actually approve of the tariffs here. So he's still got Republicans mostly in his corner. But maybe that changes things. And maybe it changes things also because here's like something that I think has sort of been lost in all of this, right? We're arguing about whether these tariffs are legal. But we're not really arguing about whether or not they're a good idea and why and what they're for. And this is the question I want to ask you, Eric. What is the justification? What is the argument that the people who want these tariffs in place, Donald Trump, his lieutenants, what is the argument that they are making? What is their reason for wanting these tariffs in the first place at this point?
Yeah, well, that's changed a bunch, and there's a sort of a bunch of different overlapping and sometimes conflicting justifications. The big one that Trump has talked about for the longest time is the trade deficit, and so I think it's interesting to note, and people should keep in mind that the trade deficit actually hit its highest level ever last year. So we did all these tariffs in February. We had a bunch of tariffs in April. We had more tariffs. They didn't impose all of them to the full extent that Trump originally promised because he did back off. To Catherine's point, the market checked some of these bad ideas. But the trade deficit didn't fall. It increased. We hit a record trade deficit in goods last year. The other thing they've talked about is like increasing. I have a piece in the last issue of the magazine talking about this too, that like U.S. Trade Representative Jamison Greer has talked about how the goal here is to increase the percentage of America's GDP that comes from manufacturing jobs. I think that's just a kind of silly thing to look at because you're talking about, that's just shifting around the pieces on the pie, right? If you're going to increase the size of the slice that is manufacturing output, what is decreasing to make up for that? It sort of ignores the fact that you could just grow the entire pie. The size of manufacturing in the U.S. actually has been growing. Just the slice of pie of manufacturing GDP has been shrinking because the rest of the economy is growing faster. That's a good thing. That's not something to be upset about. So the goals that they've set for themselves here, I think, are the wrong goals. And then not only are they the wrong goals, but they're choosing the wrong tactics to pursue those goals. And now you end up in a situation where Scott Lincecum has so he put this as a headline in a piece that he wrote. I think it was at the Dispatch, but he's been saying this for a long time. It is that Trump just likes tariffs. That's it, really. When you get down to the bottom here, and when you listen to that press conference that Trump gave the other day after the Supreme Court ruling, you're left with the impression that this is a guy who just wants to do his tariffs. It's just my boxes, but it's for tariffs. He wants the tariffs. We're going to do tariffs. If you tell him no tariffs, he's going to do tariffs anyway. And so that's
the most beautiful. It's the most beautiful word in the English language, he says, which is peculiar.
So any of the other justifications are kind of like, I don't know, it's somewhat foolish to even try to understand the goal here because the goal is just doing tariffs.
I think though, if you go back to what Katherine was talking about, his True Social post, which I can remember, it's the same one or a different one where he also preemptively talks about what pieces of shit the Supreme Court is for striking down birthright citizenship, which he's obviously going to lose. And it's like, I think we've got to start talking about putting dad in a rest home. I mean, the quality of thought, and I'm not, I don't care, that he eats a steak with ketchup or anything like that. I don't care about the gold per se, but when you look at the quality of the thought as represented, in his True Social post, in that, that press conference, in that AI video, in the various things that, it always turns out it's actually a raccoon that is running the social media and, accounts of the White House while the intern is off at a neo-Nazi rally or something like that. But there's something really fundamentally creepy going on in Trump's head.
Okay, Nick, I want to just drill down on that a little bit because you have on this podcast since Trump's first term sometimes said, well, look, I don't want to go sort of full bore, never Trump, right? You're just kind of, you don't, right? Like, you're interested in the good things he does. You're like, you want to criticize him when he's bad on policy, which you have like very consistently. But in some ways, what you're saying is that Trump, the man, the individual, you're talking about the quality of the thought, the sort of the craziness of his tweets, the stuff, or whatever he's posting on Truth Social, the way that he's just acting kind of like a maniac, like he's deranged. Does that in some way suggest, like, are you rethinking like Trump's critics and maybe Trump's critics of us also, that we weren't hard enough on Trump?
I mean, always, and people remind me of it, not just close personal friends, but absolute strangers on social media remind me, that I said I was cautiously optimistic about Trump's second term. I said I preferred him winning to Kamala Harris, which I did. And I think that was the right decision. I think Harris would have been bad in profound ways. I know that Trump is bad in very profound ways. And I think one of the things that is, remains to play out is the people around him this time are worse than the first time. I mean, he's kept, people like Peter Navarro, out of jail. So he's got time on his hands. People like Stephen Miller. J.D. Vance is in a power position, and these are worse people than in the first term, and how they affect him and his policy and his influence is a big issue. And then I think the other two things, one that Katherine pointed out, which is that the things that have checked him so far is public opinion, the markets, and then the other thing that might is what happens in the midterms, because for a variety of, historical reasons, we would expect the Republicans to do very poorly in these midterms when you have a president who cannot run for another term. It's his second term. Historically, the party in power does very poorly in the midterms. A lot of indicators look like, it should be a blowout. But Trump is very smart in that he is running against Democrats. So that may not. But if there is a major loss of, the House and the Senate, how does Trump respond to that? So, yeah, I'm worried about it. And I think the system will hold, because I do think the Supreme Court, for whatever reason, has been doing a pretty good job. I think there is an invigorated media that is not full of Trump derangement, syndrome. I think, Katherine's piece a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times talking about, hey, we've been talking about this for a long time. I think that's getting a wider hearing. And, the fact that self-identification, according to Gallup, by both Democrats and Republicans are at or near all-time lows. So this is, these are all good indicators that however bad Trump is, America will be fine.
All right, we're going to take a break now. And when we come back, something else to worry about. We're going to war in Iran. We'll see. It's tax season again, and charitable donors all over are digging through emails, receipts, and bank statements, and they're trying to reconstruct a year's worth of charitable giving. The good news is there is a better way. Donors Trust is the donor-advised fund provider for libertarians. Our friends at Donors Trust can help you simplify your giving, maximize your tax advantages, and support the causes you believe in, all from one account. You can contribute cash, stock, or other assets, and you'll receive a single receipt for your tax deduction each year. You can recommend grants to your favorite organizations on your own schedule, so no more December 31st rush, no more tax season scramble. Plus, the experts at Donors Trust can advise you on the most effective giving strategies. Their team shares your limited government views and will ensure that your giving remains faithful to your convictions. To learn more, download 6 key reasons to use a donor-advised fund. Just go to donorstrust.org/reason. That's donorstrust.org/reason. This will make your next tax season so much less painful. All right, something else we are keeping an eye on here is there is a massive buildup of military equipment, U.S. military equipment in the Middle East happening over the past several days, as well as reports and rumors that the Trump administration is preparing to strike Iran. By the time you hear this podcast, we're recording on Monday afternoon, it is definitely possible, though far from certain, that the United States will already have done so. We just don't know if it's going to happen, and we don't know when. But there is this huge movement of troops and equipment, refueling planes, all the stuff that you need to wage a war. And this is different than when we bombed Iran last time, because what people are talking about is not just a one and done strike, although there are some reports saying maybe it's going to be a symbolic strike. But what people are talking about is a war that could last days, weeks, months. And when you're talking about a war that's where you plan for it to last weeks, well, the wars don't go to plan, right? That's just not how it happens. So, Nick, I want you to sort of talk us through what you think about this, what you think about the situation generally, how you think about it in the context of Trump's reputation. He ran against foreign wars. I mean, not just for the second term, but I go back to this all the time. Trump's breakout moment in his first Republican primary was at the South Carolina GOP debate, when he just rejected Jeb Bush's idea that George Bush had kept us safe and kept us out of wars, right? And he was like, I'm not going to do that. That was stupid. We shouldn't be getting into endless wars of choice in the Middle East. And yet here we are, prepared maybe to launch another one.
Yeah, there is a possibility with Donald Trump. And this is, I think, something, forget about the European mind not being able to comprehend anything. I think the libertarian mind cannot comprehend a foreign policy that is neither complete isolationism nor complete kind of, neocon interventionism and wars without end. Amen. Trump has shown, and I'm not a fan of this. I think what he did in Venezuela is illegal and is wrong. I don't fully understand the rationale behind the big bomb drop in Iran, which should have eradicated the way in which Iran would have been able to attack America directly with nuclear weapons or whatever. But Trump has shown the potential of wars where we don't put boots on the ground, where we drop a few bombs strategically and we aid certain allies up the hilt, but we do not get involved. And that may well be what this ends up being. But I am deeply, deeply troubled by, the fact that we don't know exactly why we would be going to war with Iran if we are. And, this is something where it doesn't work out just because you have a president who spends years working the refs or explaining the justification for why we go to war. I mean, George W. Bush, almost immediately after 9/11, kind of started talking about, or people in his administration, of why we're going to have to go to Iraq, even though Iraq had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks. And they built an explicit case, and they said, here is evidence. They made a logical argument with supporting data, much of it wrong, and everything. So it's not good necessarily that you explain.
It was a bad argument, but at least it was an argument.
It was an argument. And with Trump, it is absolutely unclear. And, he seemed to be the one person. I think this is why he broke out in 2016 in a profound way. I mean, Rand Paul also got this, but, he was the one who said our entire foreign policy led predictably to long, drawn-out, disastrous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's, it's a terrible thing to send kids to die, for dumb wars. And that's, but he seems more than willing to be able to do that now, or he believes that he can drop a few bombs and that'll take care of it. But I do want to say, in this, I think it's a standing challenge to libertarian kind of orthodoxy and ideology to say, what if there is a foreign policy that is more, it is not what we have seen going back at least to George H.W. Bush, but it's something different.
Something different isn't necessarily something better, though.
No.
And I just want to follow up on Nick's point here, which is that there is not a public case being made. And this seems just crazy to me that we might be about to enter a prolonged war in the Middle East without any kind of public justification. There has not been a big speech. There's not been movement in Congress. There's not been, even really leaks to newspapers, right? Sort of saying this is why we think we're going to do this. The New York Times wrote about this and said, well, look, it's not like there's literally zero justification. Trump talks about preventing Iran from being able to produce a nuclear weapon. Rubio says, right, that there's some other reasons, protecting protesters, wiping out the missile arsenals, right, maybe to protect Israel, right, ending Tehran's support for Hamas and Hezbollah, so, terrorism, that sort of thing, right? So it's not quite that you literally cannot imagine a justification at all. It's that the Trump administration is making zero effort to communicate this to the public. They just don't care. Why? How did we get in this situation, Eric, where the Trump administration is supposedly the anti-war candidate on the ticket in 2024, and then now just making no case at all to the public before they are maybe about to launch a major war?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mistake to not try to get support from the public first for this, but also I don't think the support would be there from the public. So maybe they're just looking at it that way. I think an underappreciated part of this story is actually the complete destruction of the Pentagon press corps, like midway through last year by the Trump administration, right? And that works two ways. One that I think two kind of in different directions here. It means that on one hand, as you said, Peter, we have a lot less information circulating to the public about what the heck is actually going on out there. And you have, you're not going to have outlets like the New York Times, talking about the fact that they don't have the access they once did inside the Pentagon. But certainly there has been, not the expected amount of leaks, and everybody is kind of speculating about, are we going to war? Is this all a big bluff? If there was a Pentagon press corps that hadn't been completely, basically wiped out, shut down, except for some, Trump supporters that are still in there from outlets like, I guess it's like Newsmax and places like that still have seats there. I think we would know. Yeah, Tim Pool. I think we would know more if we had actual reporters in the Pentagon. On the other hand, the Pentagon press corps, historically has been kind of terrible, right? It's been a really useful tool for selling to the American public really bad wars, like the one in Iraq. So that tool just doesn't exist now, which maybe cuts against the Trump administration's interest here in trying to sell a new war. So I'm not really sure which way it goes, but I think that's an underappreciated aspect of why there's this vacuum of information out there.
The way I learned that we were maybe about to launch a war in the Middle East was by reading Twitter and seeing seeing the airplane nerds document flight movements. And I think that is how a lot of Americans were awoken to this possibility last week. Not with a speech, not with an A1 story in the New York Times, the Washington Post, nothing like that, with Twitter flight nerds. And I almost wonder, Eric, You're making the case that it is bad that we don't have a press corps in the Pentagon, or that there's definitely costs.
It goes both ways. Yeah.
On the other hand, I almost wonder if, this is now how we're going to find out things about our government, and because this is not coming from a press corps that is cheerleading war, maybe there are some upsides here.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's certainly more diffuse. I mean, we've seen that with even just coverage of the war in Ukraine, right? The amount of reporting that's been done there by non-traditional methods and people who are, really just sitting on their computers and watching the movement of troops in real time. We have the ability to do that. People have the ability to do that now and to aggregate that information. So we don't necessarily need that press corps there. Although the leaks that come out of the Pentagon are often helpful as you try to put together the pieces and try to read between the lines on big things like this. I think we also, you asked Peter about, the Trump administration trying to build a case for war, why that hasn't happened. I mean, we also just have to keep in mind that these are some deeply unserious people, right? The press release from June in which the White House declared, and we can put this in the show notes, it's still up at whitehouse.gov, Iran's nuclear facilities have been obliterated and suggestions otherwise are fake news. That was the headline on a press release in June. If they've been obliterated, why are we going about maybe going to war with Iran now to stop their nuclear development? So it's difficult because we don't know what we don't know, and it's also difficult because the people in charge are just not going about this in a very serious way.
I have the micro view of coverage of potential war in Iran, and that is that Matthew Petty, who has been our correspondent on this matter, has been posting every day for weeks now. I will write about such and such a thing unless the war in Iran starts, in which case I will write about that. Truly for weeks. And he has to take the afternoon off tomorrow. So I can only assume that this is this is better than the pizza index. This is better than the flight trackers. Like the petty wife's birthday index tells me
I'm gonna get on Kalshi right now and place this bet. This is
when the war will start. But seriously, I mean, it is Reason is not a super sourced up foreign policy magazine, but our guy who is following this doesn't know why we would go to war and doesn't know when we will go to war. And that, I think, is really telling, because if he doesn't know, certainly the American people don't know.
The pizza tracker knows. The flight trackers know.
Wait, is the pizza tracker?
The pizza tracker is the Pentagon pizza orders.
That's not the pedophile pizza
Very different than Cosmic Pizza or whatever.
The Domino's going into the Pentagon.
This is the pizza orders coming to the Pentagon tracker.
Place, though.
Yeah.
But
it would be, yeah.
It's all coming together, Eric.
And then you throw in ping pong, and it's like whatever.
Yeah.
The thing that is also kind of interesting, independent of the politics of all this stuff, is the shifts in the Middle East. Where, and again, this is, I guess, to Trump's credit on some level, but Israel has debilitated a lot of Iran's abilities to function as a state sponsor of terrorism. Hezbollah is pretty much wiped out. Hamas is essentially gone. It seems clear that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, probably to some degree the UAE, certainly they are interested in getting rid of a lot of longtime problem neighbors. And it's not like any of them are the best people on the block or anything like that. But it is conceivable that this is all part of something that will involve a massive redrawing of Middle East power, because Russia, which has also had a heavy thumb in the region, is kind of tied up with things in Ukraine and whatnot. So it's conceivable, that the end of an Iran, certainly of the Islamic regime, even if it gets pushed by an American, military action that I am not comfortable with, and that none of us knows why exactly it's happening. It's possible that this will, create the next stage of a new Middle East where there is more peace in the region, because you get rid of places, you get rid of Syria, you get rid of a bunch of terrorist groups, you get rid of Iran. Maybe something better comes out of that.
All right, well, let's move on to something that I definitely don't understand and have no justification for, the Olympics. Yeah. Eric, when we were talking about this in Slack beforehand, you wrote something that you wanted to make a case for why liking the Olympics is my least libertarian view, and you don't care.
Yeah, I don't care. I think we talk about this all the time, right? About what's your least libertarian view. I think it's probably this one. A caveat.
Why is liking the Olympics not libertarian?
Well, I mean, because it's a really expensive, corrupt show of nationalism, right? But and yes, it would be better if they were not so corrupt. And I do very much prefer it when the Olympics are held in other places, so that I'm not even indirectly footing the bill for this stuff. But the Olympics are great. This is the best form of nationalism. You can't say that the US-Canada game yesterday didn't make you swell with pride, Peter. Come on, right? You watched that hockey game all the way from the beginning to the end, right? Right?
I think I saw a meme about it.
Finally, we can take on Canada, our oldest enemy.
Yeah, and win. No, these were the best Winter Olympics, I think, in quite some time. And that's in part because of just where they were held. I think it was a great viewing experience for Americans who are into this stuff, like me, because of the time zone shift. The last couple were in China and Korea, and that's just awkward to try to watch, in the middle of the night. Although I did stay up at 3 a.m. to watch the U.S. win gold when they were in Korea in curling. But it was in the Alps. That's just where the Winter Olympics belong. The scenery, the biathlon venue in particular was just stunning all week. I watched every single one of those biathlon races because it's seriously one of the most compelling sports during the Olympics. It's really cool to watch. And then there were just really awesome storylines that I think everybody got into. Alyssa Liu winning the gold medal for the U.S. women's figure skating team. Obviously, the U.S. hockey teams, men and women, both won gold, both beat Canada. And I guess just one last thing to note here is there were also some great non-American stories. Johannes Kleibo, who won, you guys have heard of Johannes Kleibo, right? He won all 6 of the men's cross-country skiing events, all 6 of them. Do you know how nuts that is? The shortest race is a kilometer and a half.
I'm guessing.
A kilometer and a half is the shortest one. The longest one is 50 kilometers. That's longer than a marathon. So this is like if the same guy won the sprints at the Summer Olympics and then also went out and won the marathon. Like that's how incredible
this the guy who I
is.
saw the clip of on Twitter, and he was running uphill, not skiing, running while wearing skis uphill.
So this is the last thing I'll say. I'll pass it off to other people to talk about how great the Olympics are. But this is my argument for why the Olympics are so great. It's that somebody like him, who is outstanding. He is a phenomenal athlete. He is one of the most skilled athletes on the planet, certainly the most skilled cross-country skier on the planet. There's no doubt about that. Nobody cares about him except for 2 weeks every 4 years. We get to tune in and we get to see these people who are just like athletic freaks at a very particular set of skills. And that's awesome. I like seeing people who have just like perfected their pursuit of athletic greatness like that.
Nick, do you want to talk to us about the drama over the two Chinese-American athletes, Alyssa Liu and Eileen Gu?
Yeah. And first, just to kind of underscore what Eric said, the reason why the Olympics is so anti-libertarian is that the modern games were specifically created by a Frenchman, Pierre de Coubertin, after the Franco-Prussian War and France got its ass kicked by Germany then, where athletes would compete for their countries rather than as individuals. It could have been the ultimate individual athletic competition, but instead it is profoundly and always already political before it even gets going. And then we have,
before Kash Patel shows up in the locker room.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he's the lagging indicator of this. I mean, there's a reason why, the Berlin Games in 1936 were a showcase for Nazi Germany. Both the United States and the Soviet Union did things where they would, withhold athletes because they didn't want to lose national prestige and things like that. And I say this as somebody who loves the Olympics, particularly the Summer Games. But the two stories of the Chinese-American athletes, one a skater whose father was a refugee, who was a Tiananmen Square demonstrator who came to America. It is amazing to see her coming, ultimately she was born in America, flourishes in America, skates for America, wins for America. And then there is a fascinating counterpart, also born in America, I believe, Eileen Gu, who's a freestyle skater, who's the most medaled, skier, rather in that category, who chose to compete for China and gets paid directly by the Chinese government as well as by massive endorsements. So she was, I think, last year the fourth best paid female athlete in the world. And I suspect most people did not know who she was until these games. And in a way, Gu refuses to talk about any internal politics in China, but she should have to, just as Liu should have to on some level, because you are representing a country. But I want to, there was a great piece by Mike Pesca talking about why don't the media ask more questions about Eileen Gu and her deciding to represent China. In a way, I think that's a legitimate question, but she made, weirdly, the smartest business decision she could have made was to represent communist China, because that's going to give her a massively bigger footprint, in Asia as well as in the West, where people tend not to care about this kind of stuff. But this is the one thing the Olympics is phenomenal at, as Eric was kind of suggesting. It just creates storylines that are, every time there are these bizarre storybook and sometimes nightmarish storylines out of history and out of individual triumph and defeat.
Katherine, Robbie Suave, Reasons Robbie Suave, occasional guest on the Roundtable, wrote about this for Roundup this morning, talked about the New Jersey Devils' Jack Hughes, who scored the winning goal to bring the United States hockey team the gold against Canada. Right, he had gotten smashed in the face earlier in the game through his sort of like great kind of crazy bloody grin. The kicker to Robbie's little note on this was, "You're either excited about this or you hate America." Which is it?
I think that Robbie would agree with me, because we have discussed this on this podcast, that I am interested in this largely for the gay hockey show dynamic. And I understand that the broken teeth made it hard for him to kiss anyone in this moment, one of his fellow teammates or a Canadian player. That would have been fine as well. But I am a little disappointed.
Is that an enemies to romance?
Yes,
enemies to lovers.
Exactly, my
subplot is what
friend.
You're not supposed to turn this into fan fiction.
Everything is fan fiction, Peter.
Yeah.
And in fact, I brought for you a third-party source here, the author of the book Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is just heated rivalry but for politics, was offline for the entire month of the heated rivalry saga and signed back on in order to give a quote to New York Magazine. What is happening to the American audience? This is truly the same thing as if you gave a Victorian child a Dorito Locos taco. That is how she's describing the reaction to heated rivalry. And I don't really know what that means, but it feels right. And it makes me proud to be an American.
If Katherine had a time machine, that's how she would use it.
That's how
Doritos Locos Tacos.
Really,
straight to
I have
the
a bunch of stuff that I do think there's not a lot I could bring to the past. I don't know how the internet works really, but Dorito Locos Taco for sure.
Forget Harry Turtle Dove. Right, his whole book series is like, what if we gave guns to the Confederates?
He's thinking too small.
What if we gave Doritos Locos to Victorian children?
Yep.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to have a listener question about an article that Nick wrote about declining support for Republicans and Democrats. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Well, it's February again, and that means that Valentine's Day is just around the corner. For some people, that is tough because Valentine's Day can make you feel like everyone else has it all together when it comes to their love lives. But if you feel that way, you're not alone because there are a lot of people like you. They're just finding their way in this world. And no matter where you are in your romantic journey, therapy can help. Therapy can help you figure out what you want, how to process your emotions, how to take some pressure off. It can help you see more clearly who you are and what you really want from life. And that is where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp has quality therapists who work according to a strict code of conduct. BetterHelp has a therapist match commitment as well. They're going to help you find somebody who can help with your therapy goals. All you got to do is take a short questionnaire. And if you're not happy, you can always switch therapists. With over 30,000 therapists in their network, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform. They serve over 6 million people globally. And people who've tried it say it works. The average rating for a live session is 4.9 out of 5. That's based on over 1.7 million client reviews. So sign up, get 10% off at betterhelp.com/roundtable. That's betterhelp.com/roundtable. All right, as a reminder, we love to answer your questions so long as they are short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long. You can send your questions to podcasts@reason.com. That's podcasts@reason.com. Put the word listener question in your subject line. That way I know it's actually a listener question. All right, this week's listener question comes from Garen, and it's about an article that Nick wrote for the old reason.com. Garen writes, Nick's recent article about diminishing support for Republicans and Democrats got me thinking that from a libertarian point of view, one of the best options for the next presidential election would be to have Rand Paul versus Jared Polis. Unfortunately, in all the interviews I've seen, neither one seems all that interested in running. Short of sending R2-D2 with a message, how can we convince them they are our only hope? Thank you for that Star Wars reference, Garen. And also, this kind of seems like fanfic, doesn't it, Nick? What do you think?
And, maybe they could also fall in love. Things we're having a White House throuple.
I endorse.
Would be, or a polycule. Would be kind of nice. They got that fenced-in yard already. Why not put it to use? I think that would be great. And obviously, there's no way to do that. But, one thing that is hopefully will start to happen is the extreme Trump MAGA, dimension of things. I don't think is going to have a lock on the Republican Party after the midterms. And that gives somebody like a Rand Paul or more, I don't even want to say centrist Republicans, but actual limited government Republicans, the possibility to flex. I don't know who those are. I don't know where they come from, but I'm sure that they will, make some attempt to punch out of a wet paper bag to get on the stage. I think with the Democratic Party, you might see something like that. Polis, shows every indication of wanting to run, but I don't know that he has any real support in any meaningful way. And, you have the insurgent kind of AOC, Democratic Socialist, Mamdani style people. It's not very popular even within the Democratic Party. They're not going to do well. And then you have the Newsom. I talked to Pete Buttigieg. The interview will be going up tomorrow in the recent interview. He had been a kind of centrist, common sense Democrat early in his run in 2020. I don't think he's that anymore. He, in our conversation, just to preview it, when asked like what is, where is a place where the government doesn't have to be, he really doesn't have an answer for that. So somebody like Polis would be very refreshing, but I don't think there's a constituency for that in the Democratic Party right now. There is going to be somebody like Newsom because he comes from a big state, California. Reagan came from California. California governors can get elected president, and Newsom doesn't show anything like this. So I don't see it happening.
When there was some rumors about whether Jared Polis was going to be tapped to be Kamala Harris's vice presidential candidate, the quote he gave was that he just didn't think that Harris was looking for a 49-year-old balding gay Jew from Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
Katherine, one way to interpret this listener's question is, what's the upshot of people hating Republicans and Democrats more and more every day? How do you get something out of that that's productive and good for politics?
I do think there is a point where we get to the kind of power brokers or smoky backroom deciders of either party saying, well, it can't be worse than it is. We might as well try something crazy. That historically does not yield more liberty-oriented limited government candidates. That yields Donald Trump. So I think that sort of theory has its limits, but there is something to be said for, and I think like Nick is the person who most often articulates this, but like there is something to be said for, is there a point where people get so fed up with business as usual that they do try something new? And I think Jared Polis's candor is admirable, and it is true that there are certain biases in the electorate and in the party decision-making apparatuses that are stacked against him. But I also, I guess I remain hopeful that at some point someone might be like, we could try freedom.
Yeah, that good. I'm glad you're hopeful. Eric, this does make me think about our first segment on tariffs, right? And in particular, the part about Congress, because part of the problem here, I sort of wonder if you agree with this, is that there are not candidates who are stepping up for liberty or freedom, or just not candidates who are making a name for themselves because Congress has decided to take itself out of the action. And it sort of seems like, this was the framers' design, was that Congress wouldn't just protect the institutional prerogative, but the individual members of Congress would want to make names for themselves. Yeah. And they would do so by doing the stuff that Congress is supposed to do, like legislating. And so it sort of seems to me like, if you take this idea of like Nick's idea and sort of people hate Republicans and Democrats more, that individuals in Congress, sure, there's 535 of them, but it's not that many in a country of nearly 400 million people. Shouldn't they look at this and think, if I want to be a more successful politician, I should be doing my job?
Yeah, but I think, unfortunately, most of them are looking over their shoulder and saying, I will be a very much less unsuccessful politician if I get primaried by, some Yahoo that Trump decides to endorse in my district next time around. And whatever the equivalent of that is on the left, I think like the primary system that we have right now, particularly in states where it's like a closed primary, has really wrecked that sort of, that, as you said, Peter, is very essential to kind of the understanding of how the government's supposed to work. And we've really cut the legs out from under it because people can't stand out there and do their own thing and be their own person and be a leader when you're a member of Congress, because you're always looking over your shoulder. I think I would also just push back very gently against the premise of the question. Yes, of course, I would love a Rand Paul type and a Jared Polis type in the next election. But I also don't want to fall into this trap that Republicans and Democrats fall into all the time of thinking boy, if only our guy had all the terrible, awful powers of the presidency, then things would be great, right? The thing that we really desperately need in this country. And it would be certainly helpful if we had a Jared Polis type or a Rand Paul type in that position. But the thing we really desperately need is a concentrated effort on the part of the courts and on the part of Congress and on the part of just like regular people and state governments and everybody who's involved in civic society to try to push the presidency back into its constitutional box. And that sort of thing is not going to happen just by getting a guy that we like elected to that position. So that is like, yeah, in some ways, I guess maybe even more depressing than the idea that we're never going to get a libertarian elected president. But it is it's maybe just as hopeless of a goal, but one that I think is actually more important, probably.
All right. Speaking of difficult questions, let's talk about an article in the Wall Street Journal that ran a couple of days ago. This is about how there was a mass shooting in Canada, and apparently the shooter, weeks or so before the shooting happened, had talked to ChatGPT about shooting scenarios. These chat logs were read by a dozen or so employees of OpenAI, which is the company that owns ChatGPT, and they debated reporting them to authorities in Canada in advance. And they decided not to because they didn't believe that it met the test for necessary reporting, which is an imminent threat. And the shooter apparently also created a game on Roblox, which is a sort of a social gaming platform where you can create your own games. And it was a game that simulated a mass shooting. So I don't know if those people knew in advance, but certainly that's come out since then. And so part of this is just this sort of disturbing story about a mass shooter here. But the other thing that is coming out of this is people are realizing that absolutely everything you type into ChatGPT, into Claude, into these big AI LLMs, that can be read. That is not private information. There's one reason why lawyers are worried about all of this. And so, Katherine, I'm just curious how you respond to this, because this is something that libertarians are sometimes divided on, whether this sort of private sector surveillance is something that we should in fact be worried about, or whether it's, well, look, you're deciding to give your information to a private company, not that big a deal.
Yeah, I mean, always the question is, where is the intersection between the massive amounts of information that the private company has and the state? And sometimes the state takes that information by force, and sometimes there's a more collaborative effort. I do want to note, though, that in this exact same way that the folks at OpenAI looked at all this information that they had and said, you know what, this seems bad, but we have rules of conduct, we have guidelines that we follow, and this does not violate those guidelines. Law enforcement in the area did exactly the same thing. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind. Like, they visited the home of the shooter. They took away the guns from the house temporarily. There were previous mental health calls on this person. Like, it's sort of actually somewhat sort of darkly reassuring that that same mistake was made in pursuit of trying to honor due process and trying to do the right thing and trying to follow the rules. I do think there will be, there has been a call. Red flag laws are an example of this, where even folks who generally do favor a presumption of liberty and who do favor the Second Amendment will say we need a tool to intervene and take guns away from people who have domestic violence complaints and the like, because that is predictive. Even some people who identify as libertarians like those laws. Reasons Jacob Sullum has written against them, I think, very compellingly. But obviously, this shooting is horrible. It's a horrible disaster, and I sort of hate to sound like Nick here, but like the system maybe kind of worked. Like the system held in the sense that both this private company and the state, in their own boxes, understood that there hadn't been a violation when it was just speech, and they misjudged the risk. And we're always going to have that happen from time to time, and it sucks when it does. But I think, if anything, OpenAI should be being praised for following their own rules and standards and making those rules and standards clear. Listen, you're an idiot if you think the stuff that you type into any box anywhere on the internet is secret and private. And I wish that there were more companies that sold the product. The thing you type into our box really is secret and private. There are some, right? Signal suggests this about themselves, Proton Mail, there's all kinds of, but those are not widely in use. any widely used product that doesn't explicitly advertise itself as being privacy supporting and privacy protecting, you type it into a box in the internet, someone knows you typed it into a box in the internet, and don't be stupid about that.
Yeah, so this is all happening in the context of a sort of wider backlash against AI that I think is growing. There's just people sort of voting against data centers being put in their neighborhood. Katherine, we don't have the cover here, do we?
No,
we don't have
but
the cover story. So
we will put it in the show notes.
Our latest cover story is by Christian Britschke, and it is a defense of data centers. It has just an absolutely amazing cover image. I would urge you to seek this out. But since Katherine raised the prospect of state and private sector working together, Nick, I don't know if you saw this story about the feud between the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and Anthropic, which makes Claude, one of the big AI makers. And I guess the Pentagon uses Anthropic's AI quite heavily. It's built into a lot of their programs there. But what they want is for Anthropic to remove the safety limitations. And Anthropic says, we'll do that up to a point. But according to Axios, they have two things they're not going to do. They're willing to loosen their existing usage restrictions, but they want to wall off two areas: mass surveillance of Americans and the development of weapons that fire without human involvement. That actually seems not crazy to me, but the Pentagon is threatening to make Anthropic not just say we're not going to use your product, but to designate them in some way that makes them sort of a key supply chain risk that basically says nowhere in the government, none of our contractors can use your technology at all. I mean, that would be a big, big step. What do you make of this back and forth between the Department of Defense and our AI overlords?
Yeah, and and the head of Anthropic also got on the shit list of MAGA by saying that they basically believe in a classical liberal government of government by laws, not men, limited government, free markets, and things like that, which was seen as dangerously left wing, or clearly left wing by Katie Miller, the wife and podcasting wife of Stephen Miller. One of Trump's chief advisors. I think, a key thing to always a key distinction to understand is always, when is it that a private company is doing something with the data that you agreed to, however vaguely in terms of service, versus when does the government come and say, we deserve access to your data and under what conditions? And I think, this goes back to many debates that really came to the fore after the passage of the Patriot Act. And I think we want to make sure that that the public sector and that the government is under very strict limitations in how it accesses people's information and whether or not those people are made aware of requests. We've stopped talking about a lot of this stuff, but the number of information requests that the governments at all levels, especially the federal government, does to massive database and social media and other tech companies is really deeply disturbing. I think in this case, I don't use Anthropic, not out of, basically out of path dependency, but I like that. I like the fact that they're willing to say to the government, we will do business with you, but we will not simply do whatever you ask, because there are real, we have values in our company. And I think that those values should play out in the marketplace, not just of ideas, but in the marketplace of goods and services. And that when you have a government that starts threatening businesses, and this, to go back to, is Trump categorically different when it comes to the ways he has nationalized various companies? None of that is brand new, but kind of the intensity and the pace of that, is it getting somewhere different? AI is a different beast slightly than previous technologies. So I think it's disturbing, but I don't think that the Defense Department should be able to shake down companies in this way.
Eric, before the pod, Katherine and I were talking about a quote that's been going around from Sam Altman, in which he compares humans to data centers. Katherine, do you have that quote?
I do. Well, so somebody says, oh, they use a lot of energy, right? And he says, this is an unfair comparison. It also takes a lot of energy to train a human. It takes like 20 years of life and all the food you eat before that time, before you get smart.
Yeah.
Some of us never get there.
People were really
actually.
mad about it. Right. I mean, people were really mad about this, though. And I think there is this, like I said, this kind of growing cultural backlash against AI, that it's not just it's coming for our jobs, but it's also coming for our humanity, for our creativity. It's going to write our articles for us. It's going to make our movies for us. Do you, I don't know, sort of how do you react to that personally? Does you have concerns sort of about the humanity aspect, but also just about the surveillance part of it? I mean, when you tell ChatGPT what you're thinking about, you have a conversation about your health issues, or even just an article that you are working on, you are giving them a huge amount of personal information and trusting that will stay private.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've been somewhat skeptical of ChatGPT, so I have been very careful in what I use it for and how I use it. But I do use it, and you're right. There is a compendium of information there now, even from somebody who's somewhat more reticent to get deep into it. I think really what Katherine said is, don't talk to the cops and don't tell ChatGPT your plans to commit crimes. Like that seems like a good place to start. I don't know. I think there's been some stuff going around the last few weeks about how there's people working in this world who understand this stuff better than I do, better than all of us do, I think, who have recently come out to say that this feels to them like January of 2020 kind of all over again, that like there's something on the horizon, some big disruptions that are coming that we may not be prepared for. So I am trying to trying to take it as it comes and be prepared for changes, because I think we're not necessarily on the cusp of something new. We are in the middle of something brand new that we've never seen before as a society or a species. So we're gonna have some interesting times, I think, in all of the ways that line is used to indicate both good and bad.
Yeah, things are going to get pretty weird. And in the meantime, maybe we're going to bob Iran. Let's move on to our final segment, cultural recommendations, what we have been watching, reading, otherwise consuming in the cultural sphere. I am going to start this week because I watched a movie about the threat of AI. It's called Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die. It's the latest film from Gore Verbinski, who hasn't made a movie in nearly a decade, but is the guy who directed the Pirates of the Caribbean films, the first three of them, but also the Budweiser Frogs commercial. If you remember the Budweiser Frogs commercial, and this is a guy who just sort of has a great kind of commercial, like hooky mind, right? He makes great little sort of fun, quirky visuals on screen. And he has made a movie here that is fundamentally a kind of Twilight Zone or Black Mirror type anthology film about how AI is really, really bad. And unfortunately, this movie is also not very good. I am okay with filmmakers making movies that have political worldviews, it's messages that I disagree with here. But it's way too on the nose. And it's also really weird for a guy who came up making films, that used huge, like sort of heavy novel amounts of CGI, especially the second and third Pirates of the Caribbean films. Like you go back, some of that CGI looks better than the stuff that's being put out today. Because he was an innovator. He was somebody who understood the power of digital media to make better art and to make things better. And this is a movie that just doesn't reckon with that at all. It just sort of sees AI as fundamentally sapping our creative vitality and making us all into zombies. I wish I could recommend this, but unfortunately, Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die isn't enough fun. Eric, do you have a recommendation for us?
And also, can you please do your impression of the Budweiser Frogs?
Yeah, Bud. We got to do it in order, the three of us.
Oh, we have to do it together. You go first.
Bud.
Wise.
Very good. There we go. Man, it's a bummer to hear that movie is not very good, Peter, because I was looking forward to that. I figured like Pirates of the Caribbean meets Everything Everywhere All at Once with Sam Rockwell in it. Like that is a movie made for me. And that's a bummer. I'll probably see it anyway. I actually have a prop.
Rockwell is very charming. Great beard.
I love Sam Rockwell and everything he said. I don't think I've ever disliked a role of his. I have a prop. This is Azul. Mostly the thing I've consumed over the last 2 weeks has been the Olympics and large bags of popcorn. But when I haven't been doing that, my girlfriend and I have been playing a ton of this game. It's super cool. It's like this it's kind of hard to explain, but it's like you get a board and there's tiles and there's a set of tiles and you get to pick certain ones in certain sequences, and then you've got to put them on one part of the board, and then when you complete certain rows on one part of the board, you get to slide them over to the other part of the board, and then you score points depending on where you're putting them on the board there.
I totally follow this. It's just like curling.
It sounds
I can
complicated.
See it so clearly.
It's actually really quick to learn, but then there's a ton of little strategic things that you pick up as you play it more and more. We've seriously played it probably 50 times over the last few weeks and are still improving strategy and figuring out little things. So it's a really terrific game. And there's also a little bit of a cross-cultural element to it too, because it's all inspired by Portuguese tiles that were actually culturally appropriated from the Muslims when they invaded Portugal way back in the day. So there's that.
How long does each round or each game take to play? Because so many of these modern board games, you're like,
yes,
oh, sure, you have
quick.
to start at 10 a.m. on Sunday if you want to be in bed by 1 a.m.
I have that same criticism of so many modern board games, Peter, and I am happy to report that this is a relatively quick game, a half hour-ish for a full game, I would say. There's multiple rounds within a game. Each round takes, the first couple rounds go real fast, and then you spend a little more time thinking and figuring things out as you go. But 20 minutes to a half hour for a full game start to finish. So you can play multiple rounds, which we do sometimes. Anyway, Azul, it's really cool. You can find it online and maybe, at Target or something.
Nick, you want to give us 20 minutes on something you watched?
No, I'll give you 20 seconds. I watched Hamnet, the movie directed by Chloe Zhao, who also did Nomadland and unfortunately The Eternals. But it's based on a novel by Maggie O'Neill, and it's about the the circumstances that gave rise to Shakespeare writing Hamlet, and it's kind of how the mother, Shakespeare's wife, and Shakespeare process grief very differently. It's an incredible movie, beautiful, touching. It's the exact opposite of Gore Verbinski in general. And again, I always think of him as the Lone Ranger. He did the Lone Ranger, which is still somewhere, sadly playing in the multiverse. But this is a very human drama. It's a period piece, deeply, deeply touching. And there's a couple of moments, particularly towards the end, where the mother's grief and the father's grief are kind of come together on stage. Totally wonderful and beautiful. The type of movie that, I don't think it will get people back in the theater, but it will keep people watching movies for decades, if not centuries to come.
It's nominated for a number of awards. I wished I liked that movie more. I thought Jessie Buckley was great, but the movie is just Shakespeare and sad. It's exactly Shakespeare in Love, except mopey. It's
that's why it's better.
Like emo Instagram mopey. It's shot for every frame to just be a meme, right? And it's got this kind of beautiful anthropology, the mall clothier right, affect to it, right? The whole thing, and it just didn't work for me.
Not enough
CGI. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I know a number of people who think that way, but it's a remarkable meditation on grief.
The third act pretty good because they mostly just do Shakespeare, and Shakespeare not so bad. Katherine,
I mostly just want to endorse Eric's recommendation. Azul is a great board game. I played it a lot at my last beach vacation. It has a Tetris-like vibe also, it's satisfying in the way Tetris is. So. What I consumed this weekend.
You should smoke a lot of pot and just.
This game would not benefit actually from smoking a lot of pot. You gotta focus up a little. But I did another thing that I would say debatably, there's probably some pot smokers in the vicinity when I did this activity, though I wasn't one of them. I went indoor rock climbing for the first time in my life, and I went to Sport Rock in Alexandria, Virginia. They boast the highest climbing walls in the area or the world or something. And it was absolutely delightful activity. I got myself 60 feet up in the air by just hauling myself up there, and it was very cool. Was it did I climb the easiest one? Yeah, I did, because
still counts.
It still counts, though. I went with family friends because we read, I don't know, a Substack or something about how the best thing you can do for your friendships is not to get together and catch up, but instead to do hard new things together. And so we were like, we're all going to go try rock climbing. And the children obviously kicked all of our butts. Like, that's the other very important thing to know. Like, go rock climbing with small children to get perspective on your use of your body and
on
also
your lack of upper body strength.
Well, it's not. In fact, it's not about upper body strength. Is one thing I learned. You're supposed to be climbing with your legs, and also children have, a very different relationship to their kind of fear and like use of their whole bodies and things. Anyway, it was, I would say, interesting, enlightening. I would recommend it for this very purpose. Like, are there people that you like, but you're kind of tired of getting together with them and having just a little lunchy lunch and catching up? Go climb a wall 60 feet in the air. Top tier.
So we should rock climb for our next roundtable?
Next roundtable will be recorded.
Nice...
We should
from
do
the top of
we should do reason rock climbing. Since Katherine co-signed mine, allow me to co-sign hers and say that doing tough stuff with your friends is the best way to have friends. And also the people who do rock climbing seriously, like I've dabbled in rock climbing. I've never done it seriously, but the people who do rock climbing seriously are all the nicest people you will ever meet. There are no dicks at the rock climbing gym. It seems like. I don't know.
I'm going to give you a no on that one, Eric.
Yeah.
I was 60 feet in the air, my friend, having for the very first time climbed this wall. There's a man next to me, on the one next to me, who's clearly an experienced rock climber. And his commentary for me was, you really shouldn't be wearing your rings.
Oh, well, he's trying to be helpful.
Thanks, buddy. Thank you, friend. Appreciate you. So there was maybe a little mansplaining at the rock climbing. Smidge. I don't know if that was mansplaining because he did know more than me. But it was, but in general, I agree. It also has the benefit, I would say, of being like a cooperative yet individualistic sport. If we're going to put a little ideological overlay, like somebody's down there holding the rope, right? Keeping you up and it's alive.
Not the government.
And it's not the government. Nope. Yeah.
Did this make you more interested in going to watch the two big climbing documentaries that have got Free Solo?
Free Solo was discussed.
Skyscraper, which is the more recent one by the same featuring the same guy. Alex Honnold is his name. Some of my close friends from college are rock climbers who know him just a little bit. And he's apparently a very nice guy, but also they've done tests on him and he's pathologically incapable of feeling fear.
Yeah.
He just sure, 1,000 feet. Oh, it's fine. I'll just leap.
Yeah. I did not feel fear. I felt the need to go lift more weights and be stronger. But no, it didn't make me want to watch media about the thing. It made me want to do the thing. And that is what I'm pitching to you on today's What Am I Consuming is I did a thing. All
right. We did the thing. That is our show for this week, folks. Thank you all for listening, tuning in. If you like the Reason Roundtable, if you like Reason products in general, you can donate to us at reason.com/donate. That's reason.com/donate. The Reason Roundtable,